Hey everybody, welcome. It's not an episode. Instead, we are just learning how to play, and I think I am being joined by Chesh, who plays our Doctor, Dr. Tregan. Chesh, how you doing?
Hello.
Hello. You doing okay there?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are
Tee.
you?
I might not be able to stay for the whole time, but I thought I'd swing by and just
Oh my
hang out
goodness.
for a bit and
You sound like you
give
need some
everybody a
ginger tea.
yes, I had some lemon ginger yesterday.
Okay.
A little bit of honey in it, but I thought it would be funny. I figured I'd come by for a guffaw for how ridiculous I sound right now.
You do sound a little funny. Sorry.
I've been telling everybody that I sound like a 12-year-old RFK Jr.
Oh no, you do. Oh.
It's too real.
Wow. Yeah,
So about
that's.
that polio vaccine,
Please let me keep. I would
please,
prefer not to die and or be paralyzed from an
Diane.
easily preventable disease.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, guys, the idea here today is we're going to learn how to play. So, actually, Chesh, since you're here, why don't I bring up Dr. Tregan's character sheet, and you can bring that up
Oh,
too, and we'll go through some fake scenarios with Dr. Tregan and whatnot. So, I have Dr. Tregan's character sheet open here. And so this is the screen that I see as a DM. It is almost identical to the screen that you guys see on the stream or that the players see. The only real difference is that I have a few extra tools, and there's a GM layer that I have access to, as well as a lighting layer that I have access to. The players usually can't see directly. Um, so the first thing to know about this game is this is what's called a 2D20 game. That is the Modifius Games, their own special system. It is a system that is shared across several of their licensed products, including Star Trek, the Dishonored role-playing game, if you like the Dishonored games. Also, they have a license for Dune. And so if you liked the Dune movies, you want to do an RPG in that setting, they have an official one that is using this basic system. So, the basic idea behind checks in this game, which are called tasks, right, is you're going to roll 2d20. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is a task? A task is anything where the outcome and how well you do at the outcome of whatever you're trying to do will matter, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail, because there are difficulty 0 tasks, which are essentially impossible to fail. But doing better on a difficulty 0 task is better than doing worse. So, for instance, Chesh, could you take a, I don't know, daring science check for me?
yes, I can.
Thank you. So what that means is Chesh is going to go to this daring and this science. She's going to just do a task roll.
I'm
And
gonna
we'll,
roll the dice.
yes, we'll talk about what that means.
Science and daring.
Yeah.
Boop.
So Mark Right-Handed Sith Smith says, was that Dune or Doom? Dune with an N, D-U-N-E. All right. So the way this works, and we're going to explain what Chesh rolled here, is that you have a certain difficulty number assigned, a target number. You want to meet or beat that number with the number of successes you get. So Chesh has a daring of 9 and a science of 3. All task rolls are going to use a combination of the attributes up here and the disciplines down here. Now, different 2d20 games will give these two sets of numbers different labels. Some of them will call, some of them might call them styles. I believe the Dishonored use it instead of attributes, uses styles. So that will vary, but the basic idea is you'll have six of these things, You add that number together. So in this case, it's 12 because there's a 9 and a 3. So Chesh's target number to get a success on a d20 is 12 or under. So what she rolled was 2 successes. Now, if you were playing this at a tabletop, you would actually physically roll the dice. We're just doing it on Roll20, and so the Roll20 just spits back how many successes you got. But you can mouse over, you can see that she got a 12, and, a 10 and an 8. So those are 2 successes. Now, there are a couple other rules with tasks. One is, If you roll a 1 on your d20, that counts as 2 successes. And if you roll a 20, that's a complication. And the GM, or storyteller, or whatever you want to call them,
Game mommy.
yes, the game mommy, that person gets to either do one of two things. Either they can create a complication, usually connected to the task. So, for instance, this was a daring science task. So maybe Chesh was trying to, or Chesh's character, Dr. Tregan, was trying to take a geological sample from an active hot spring, and it's a little bit precarious, so she's hanging on to a tree. Well, the complication might be that now the geyser starts erupting, and she has to get out of there with a subsequent task. Okay. Well, that would be a complication. Another thing that the GM can do is add to threat, and we're going to explain what threat is in a bit, but just know that if you roll a 20, that could happen. Okay.
F.
So, we're going to do a couple more things that how tasks work. One of the things you might notice is focuses. So, Chesh, your focuses include xenobiology, historical medicine, espionage, infectious diseases, psychology, and infiltration, huh?
Don't ask why I have espionage.
It's just a thing. Don't worry about it.
And yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about infiltration. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. So let's say you have an infiltration specialization. So let's say that you are trying to sneak past a Klingon guard on a prison planet, right? You're trying to spring one of your teammates. Well, we might choose to say, okay, we're going to use insight and security, because you have to know when the guard is going to be looking or not, and that's going to be insight. And the security has to do with a lot of tasks like combat, infiltration, determining what defenses are going to go where. And I tell you, okay, you have espionage, so you can switch focused from no to yes. Your focus applies. But if you get caught, this is going to be pretty bad, and it's a risky thing. So we're going to increase the complication range to 2. Okay. So just roll that task, and let's see what happens. All right, so that's 2 more successes. In this case, Chesh rolled a 9 and a 12. All right.
I'm telling you, Dr. Tregan is like on point.
She is today, yeah. All right, so what does the focus do? So the focus is used if your focus applies, and this is something the players will ask the GM to see. Or if the GM happens to know one of their focuses applies, he might, put that forward that a focus applies. What happens is any roll equal to or under the discipline, here in this case it's 4, will count as 2 successes rather than just only a 1. Okay? The complication range is sort of the opposite. Instead of only a 20 generating complication, if the complication range is 2, then a 19 or a 20. If the complication is 3, 18, 19, or 20, and so on. So, if I want to make failure become more dangerous, what I will tend to do is increase the complication range. And if a player has a focus that they want to use to make the task easier, they'll try to see if they can use one of their focuses. So, that is what those do. Now, there are a few other times you can take a task and you won't roll 2 dice. Okay? One big one is assisting. So let's say that I'll open up another thing right here. We'll take Lieutenant Fitz, who is one of our supporting characters, something we'll get into in a bit. Lieutenant Fitz needs to take a control and engineering task in order to carefully align an emitter array on the planetary defense grid of a planet that's going to be used to deflect an asteroid. Okay, cool. Whatever. He's going to roll 2 dice with control and engineering, but let's say that Dr. Tregan wants to assist, and the way that she's going to assist is by using control and security, because while he's doing that, she's also refining the targeting algorithms for the defense laser. Okay, cool. So, she will only roll 1 die. Zerlon says, is it possible for the complication roll to get so high you can get a complication on a successful roll? Yes, it is. Barely. You have to have maximum attribute and maximum discipline and maximum complication range and roll the 15. Actually, no, I don't think it is, now that I think about it. Because it's 2019, 18, 17, 16, 12. Actually, yeah, no, it is. You can do it. All right, so Chesh, could you switch your task roll to 1 because you are going to be assisting this roll from Lieutenant Fitz. All right, so Lieutenant Fitz takes his roll, and we can see that he got 1 success, and the other one was not a success. That 18 wasn't a success. So if Dr. Tregan could take her assist.
I believe I would need to turn off my focus as well.
Yes, but also it was control and security if you want, but I don't really care. It doesn't matter what you
Oh,
roll.
sorry. Oh, you said it says engineering on the thing.
Oh, that's because the different people assisting don't always have to roll with the same things.
Okay, perfect. Control security. So focus off. Complication range goes back to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Task roll goes to 1, and off it goes.
So there you go. So Fitz rolled a 10, which was a success, and an 18, which wasn't, and then Tregan rolled an 8. Now, if Fitz had rolled no successes, then Tregan's assist roll wouldn't matter. In order for his task to be successful, the primary on the task, the person who is primarily doing the task, who's going to by default roll 2 dice, needs to have at least 1 success in order for any successes to count at all. Okay? Tasks aboard your starship usually get the benefit of the systems on the starship. So we're going to bring up the ship's character sheet here for a second. This is the USS Lexington's character sheet. You'll notice that it has... if I can... Why are you doing this to me, Firefox? Firefox is being a jerk today. Why?
I'm just gonna clarify something real quick because I'm sneaky. If anybody caught that I read that out about how his said control and engineering and mine was control and security, so you could point out that not everybody's always rolling the same thing to assist.
Yep. All right, so here we
It's
go.
called helping.
The Lexington has systems rather than attributes and departments rather than disciplines, but the departments line up directly with the disciplines, and the systems are engines, computers, weapons, structure, sensors, and communication. And it works the same way. You normally roll 1 die, and you add the system score and the department score to get your target number, and that can add a success or not, depending on how the player does. So that is the basics of tasks. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 2 meta currencies in the game that can affect how many dice you roll. They can do things like affect how many enemies you end up having to fight. It can even do things like affect the weather. Okay? The 2 meta currencies are momentum and threat. Momentum is a pool primarily used by players. It ranges from 0 to 6, and every single time the scene changes, which is determined based on when the GM thinks that the scene is over and it's time to go to a new scene, you lose 1 of the momentum in your momentum pool, and there you go. So, the easiest way to gain, or the most common way to gain momentum, is to simply get more successes than you needed for a task. So, for instance, when Dr. Tregan got 2 successes on a daring and science check, as the first check that we showed in this, if the difficulty was only 1, that would generate 1 momentum. Now, momentum can either be spent immediately if there's something you can spend it on immediately. One of the common ones is things like obtain information is a really common one. We use that one all the time. If the check was going to give you information, obtain information can give you additional information, or if the GM doesn't have any additional information already set up, it will allow you to ask a question and the GM will have to answer truthfully, although he doesn't have to give you every single detail of what's true about the question, right? So if momentum is put into the quote-unquote bank, any player can use it anytime they have something they could use it on, which is usually around a task. And they don't have to ask for permission, but sometimes they do anyway, just to see if the rest of the team thinks that it's a good idea. But you do not actually have to, right? Even if the rest of the team thinks it's a bad idea, you can go against that consensus and just use the momentum anyway.
Sometimes we play as a team. Sometimes we hate each other.
It's
It's all
true.
good.
Yeah. As long as at the end everyone had fun and no one's actually angry IRL, who cares? All right, so spending momentum can one of the biggest ones is it can get you additional dice. So normally you roll 2d20, like we have here on Lieutenant Fitz's page right here. But let's say the person playing Lieutenant Fitz doesn't think that 2 dice is going to be enough. Well, if they pay 1 momentum, they can get a 3rd die. If they pay
I
2 more,
regularly have the team telling me to use momentum and be being like, "Bah, I got it."
it's
I
true.
live it on the edge.
You do like to live on the edge. Um, if you have a 3rd die already, maybe you spent a momentum, or maybe some other special rule has given you a 3rd die. Buying a 4th die costs 2 momentum, and buying a 5th die costs 3 momentum. So if you buy 3 dice total, starting from 2 going all the way to 5, that will cost 6 momentum, which is the maximum that you can have in a pool at once. All right, and that will just literally let you roll 5 dice. So for instance, this is a control and engineering task, and if Lieutenant Fitz has bought enough dice to get him all the way up to 5 and he rolls it, well, there we go. He really, really sucked this time somehow. Because he also managed to roll 2 complications and 0 successes, rolling a
Holy shit.
15, a 17, a 20, an 18, and a 20. But let's do a more typical roll. See how that goes. Okay, this is a little bit more typical. Although it's still 2 20s. My goodness. I have the worst luck, apparently. There you go. There's a
That's
little bit
normal.
more normal. 3 successes and no complications.
That dude almost blew us up.
I know, seriously, like twice. Ridiculous.
This is how the Lexington ends up landing on the actual ground.
Yeah, that did happen once. You did sort of beach the ship that one time, didn't you?
Kinda. Well, listen, I'm not taking responsibility for that. I was in med bay.
That's true. Yeah, you had nothing to do with that mishap. All right. So,
I had everything to do with cleaning it up.
yes.
It's usually my job.
Another another option is to create a problem for the bad guys, right? You can spend 2 momentum to increase the difficulty of an enemy task by 1. You can also create an advantage. You can spend 2 momentum to create an advantage or remove a complication. So advantages and complications are traits that a scene has. So for instance, let's say the scene starts and it's pouring rain, but you're trying to track some Romulan soldiers through a jungle. And the rain is making that harder because it's washing away their footprints as you go. Well, that torrential rain counts as a complication. So you could spend 2 momentum to remove that complication. Or you could say, spend 2 momentum and say that you have created the advantage of, like, in this case, maybe, what's a good one? Oh, thick vines that the Romulans have to cut through to progress. So now you can just easily follow where the vines are cut. That makes it easier to track the Romulans through the jungle. Okay. So, the other side, though, is threat. Threat is generated in a few ways. One of the quickest ways is just rolling those complications where the GM doesn't really want to create a complication right then and right there, often because the GM doesn't have any ideas off the top of their head. The GM also usually starts with 2 threat per player at the beginning of the session. Threat does not go away when scenes change, and the GM can use threat the same way that players can, but for oppositional NPCs. So, for instance, if there is a Orion pirate who wants to stab a character with his dagger, I could give the Orion an extra die by spending 1 threat, or 2 extra dice by spending a total of 3. Or if I want to create a complication or remove an advantage that the players have, I could spend 2 threat. One unique thing is you can have a sudden reversal by spending as much threat as equals 2 times the number of players. So we normally have 6 players, which means 12 threat. If I do that all at once, I can end the scene with a sudden reversal of everyone's fortune, and then we start the new scene out dealing with the consequences of that. You'll see me do that a few times in the course of previous episodes.
I'm gonna use 12 threat, and now the planet is exploding.
Yeah, basically. There is one rule. I cannot use it to directly cause damage to players. So, like,
I think that rule is flexible if the player has already agreed to it in the background.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, like any RPG, if you and the players are all okay with like twisting the rules a bit, sure, whatever. But generally speaking, I can't say like, oh, I'm going to spend 12 threat and now the volcano erupts and everyone dies. That's not normally, or even just the volcano erupts and you all take, 3 damage from noxious fumes. I could say the volcano starts erupting, and now we have a new scene to deal with how you're going to get away from that situation. And failing might cause damage, but I can't just directly harm you with the reversal of fortune normally. Another thing is I can bring in reinforcements with threat. So if there's a combat and I want to bring in an extra warrior, or if it's starship combat, if I want to bring in an extra ship, different enemies have different threat costs that you can pay to bring them in as additional forces. Now, another way that the GM can get threat is by players doing certain things. So, for instance, if they want to shoot photon torpedoes, that's called an escalation weapon. Escalation weapons cost threat to use. So if I want to use an escalation weapon myself, I have to pay threat. But if they want to use an escalation weapon, it gives me threat. So examples of escalation weapons include photon torpedoes, phaser rifles, batleths, basically the big, really dangerous stuff like that, generally escalation weapons. Another one is if the players choose, they may give me threat instead of spending momentum. And that's regardless of how much momentum they have, right? Because certain players actually do better when they give threat rather than spend momentum, because they have certain character talents that allow them to do better when they are risk taking rather than playing it safe. So, for various reasons, players might want to give me threat in order to do things that momentum would normally do. That's another way that you'll frequently see them get more dice. So if we're low on momentum, but they really need to make a check, sometimes you'll see the players give me threat in order to buy extra dice or whatever. You can also use threat and momentum to increase damage in an attack. Okay. So that basically covers the two meta currencies, threat and momentum, and they are a really big part of the ebb and flow of the game, right? The more that the players are doing poorly and taking risks or being aggressive, the more likely things are to get more dangerous in the future. Whereas if they're doing a really great job working together, getting lots of successes, using their resources wisely, they'll tend to get a lot of momentum. And if you watch the game, you'll notice that threat and momentum come and go all the time, right? Those numbers are always in flux. You can watch the threat and the momentum go from like 0 to 6 to 12 or whatever all the time during the games. So I often encourage players to like, hey, momentum doesn't last forever. It's better to spend it than to lose it at the end of the scene. You're going to get more.
It's kind of like a better version of Dungeons and Dragons inspiration die.
Mm-hmm.
Because it basically just gives you advantage as opposed to giving you like a numbered dice bonus. And admittedly, if you were to do that in D&D, it probably wouldn't work as well. Depending. But the point is that you're supposed to, as opposed to like only getting inspiration for short periods of time or not very often, in this game, you're literally supposed to be burning it almost constantly, because there's also a really good chance every time you use it that you're going to get it back.
Yeah, there is that too. So like, if you notice, like, let's say we do another 5-die roll with Fitz. So let's say he spent 6 momentum. Okay. And it's because he's the only one who can take this task because he's nearby, but he's really bad at it. So it's command and fitness, right? He sucks at that. Okay. So we'll take it. We'll see how we did. Well, we're going to get a success here at some point. Okay, 2 successes, right? Cool. Well, he spends 6 momentum to get that. But if it was only a difficulty 1, which he's still probably going to fail, as you saw, right? Lots of zeros and a 20. Then if he instead actually gets the 2 successes, well, guess what? That's momentum that he got back because it's still more than it took. Okay. So sometimes spending momentum gets you momentum, and sometimes it can even get you more momentum than you spent. So for instance, let's say that Fitz really needs to make this check. So and it's a reason and engineering check. And he's spent a 3rd die, and it's got to do with subspace comms. So he gets to use his focus. So he spent one momentum, he rolls it, and it was only, let's say it was only difficulty 2, but it was really important that he get it right. Well, guess what? He spent one momentum to get a third die, but he just got 4 successes, which means on net, that task gained 1 momentum rather than costing momentum. So that's an important thing to remember there. Let's see. Determination. We're not going to go too much into determination because it doesn't come up all that often. But basically, there are certain things that you can do with a point of determination. Everyone starts every game session with 1. And you can do it to do a few different things. Like you can buy yourself an extra die that counts as already having rolled a 1, so it's automatic 2 successes. And it interacts with your values. So your values are not just role-playing statements, but they're also that. So for instance, Dr. Tregan has, I already have what I need to overcome any challenge as a value. Which means anytime that idea and adhering to that idea might help. So for instance, maybe she needs to MacGyver her way out of a Romulan holding cell. Okay, cool. Well, she already has what she needs to overcome any challenge. That's a determination. So she could spend that determination, gain that extra die that already counts as having rolled a 1 for 2 successes, and then describe how she uses, I don't know, a paper clip and some chewing gum wrapper to create a lockpick that she then uses with her third arm to reach through the bars of the holding cell. And
As well as I used my communicator and rigged it to, or my tricorder,
right,
and I used it to rig it to play the MacGyver theme.
exactly. And so that would be spending a point of determination. There's also other options for spending determination, but we're not going to go into it too much because, I mean, frankly, this isn't supposed to be a replacement for the rulebook. This is just to clarify what happens when we're playing. So values are pretty important. When you challenge or use a value, you can get various milestones for character advancement, or at least changing your character. So they are pretty important to have in mind. Let's see. Talents are basically the feats of this game. So, for instance, Doctor's Orders is a talent, and you need to have a certain, to qualify for it. You have to, what is it? You have to have medicine of 4+, which Dr. Tregan does with her medicine of 5. And what it does is when you attempt a task to coordinate others or to coerce someone into taking or refrain from taking a specific course of action, you may use your medicine discipline instead of command. So, for instance, let's say Dr. Tregan is trying to convince an alien that it really shouldn't go past the airlock because there's a contagion there, and instead it should just turn right around. Normally, that would be something like presence and command, if you're trying to convince someone of something. But instead, she can use her medicine attribute and do
Or,
a...
for example, somebody wants to sit on a cannon and kill themselves, I could be like, "Maybe you don't do that, though."
Right. So, talents can do all sorts of different things. They can give you extra dice. They can allow rerolls, all sorts of stuff. There's a huge list of talents that we have in our campaign reference, which is basically just a collection of all the talents I could find from official books. And everyone has their own different talents. And so, let's see. We'll go over combat really quickly. It's not terribly complicated. Basically, in combat, everyone has 2 actions. They can do a minor action and a task. Tasks usually involve task rolls, but they don't have to. So minor actions are somewhat open-ended, but it's usually something where there's no real chance of failure, and it's relatively quick to do. The listed ones from the rules that are just like default are interact, which could be something like pushing a button, using a communicator, holstering a weapon, something like that. Change position allows you to move anywhere within the zone you're in, or to any adjacent zone. And this game does not use a grid. It uses zones, which are arbitrarily defined based on sort of common sense ideas from the GM as well as storytelling. So if you could describe it with a short phrase like, I'm near the engineering console, that might be a zone. And on the balcony above the engineering console might be a different zone. Uh, there's also prepare, which can help you get ready for a task if that task takes longer than a single action. There's also restore, which could help you clear some minor fault or problem with the system. There's a whole bunch of other ones, right? Like giving a short talk to someone might be a minor action. The combat tasks that are usually in addition to attacks that are usually common include assist, pass, where you just don't attempt a task, you just pass. Ready, where you are, it's just like in D20, where you're like, okay, if the Klingon goes past the corner, I shoot him. That's readying that action. Override, which let's see, we don't come up with that one too much. We're not going to go into it too much, but it is one of them. There's direct, the commanding officer can take a task to direct someone else to take a task out of turn. There's rally, where the commanding officer can do things like get everyone to get momentum. It generates momentum by him giving an inspiring speech. There's also other things like if you're the navigator, there's plot course, chart hazard, attack patterns, evasive maneuvers, stuff like that. So there's a bunch of different tasks that each person can take. And there's no one completely set list. There's always other tasks that you could attempt. Anything that could be settled with a task roll could potentially be the task that you take during your turn in combat. There is no rolling for initiative. What happens is the GM will determine which side goes first, which is default to the players, unless there's extenuating circumstances. So, for instance, if the players fail to spot a ambush by Kzinti slavers, well, then they're not going to go first. But unless there's something like that, players go first. And what happens is one character from the player side will go, then one character from the enemy side, and back and forth until one side is out of people to act. And then the other side will act with all the rest of any people on that side. So, for instance, if there were 6 players and 8 Kzinti slavers, after the six players go, and the 6 Kzinti have gone, the other 2 Kzinti are just going to go right in a row. Players can spend momentum to keep the initiative, which means that their side does not let the other side go immediately, and they take a second turn on their side. But the GM can also do that with threat. The 2 basic attacks are melee and ranged. Ranged attacks are always control and security. Melee attacks are always daring and security. And melee attacks are opposed. So both the target and the attacker roll a daring and security check. And you have to at least get one success to hit. And the attacker wins any ties. But given those 2 caveats, that you have to get at least one, and any ties of 1 or higher, the attacker wins. Whoever rolls more successes is the one who actually gets to deal damage. Now, because this is 1st edition, we haven't switched over to 2nd edition currently, you roll with what are called challenge dice. Challenge dice, if you play on tabletop, you can either use regular d6s, or you can use special challenge dice. The special challenge dice come marked with one side with a 1, one side with a 2, 2 sides that are blank, and 2 sides that have a special symbol, usually the Starfleet symbol, but you can get other dice. I also, on my Patreon, which you don't even actually have to join the Patreon, you can just go to the website, they're not just Patreon exclusives. I have some STL files for some other challenge dice with the Tholian assembly symbol, the Ferengi Alliance symbol, and I believe the Romulan Star Empire symbol.
Them and tell them we sent you.
Yeah. So you can print those if you want. I printed some of them. They're really nice, actually. I really like my printed dice. But anyway, if you want to play with the 6-sided dice, they're just regular old 6-sided dice. The recommended way to do that is 1 and 2 are 1 and 2, 3 and 4 are blank, 5 and 6 are special symbols. So that tells you how much damage you do. Normally, the special symbol counts as 1, and if you're weapon has some special property, it will activate if you roll a special die, or if you roll a special number on the die. So, for instance, let's say that Dr. Tregan manages to hit someone with her Type 2 phaser. So, Dr. Tregan, could you roll damage for your Type 2 phaser, please? All right. So, the damage is going to be security plus the inherent damage number for the weapon, in which case this is 3. So, Dr. Tregan gets to roll, what is that, 7 damage dice? Yep. All right. So,
Yes, that is 7.
so in this case, Dr. Tregan has rolled 1 for the special, 2 for this 2, 1 for the special, and 1 for this 1. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 damage. So that will be applied to the target's stress value, which is just the same thing as hit points, except traditionally you count hit points down and you're supposed to count stress up. But whatever, it's the same thing. You get enough stress damage, bad things happen.
I count my hit points up all the time.
So now let's say that this was actually a disruptor pistol. Disruptor pistols have the trait Vicious 1, which means anytime you roll a special effect, the damage is increased by 1 for that, which means that those specials go from 1s to 2s. So that would mean if she had fired a disruptor pistol, she would have actually dealt 2, 4, 6, 7 damage instead of 5 damage that she had rolled this time. And you can even get Vicious 2, which means it does 2 extra damage, in which case it would have been 3, 5, 8, 9 damage. There's other things. There's armor piercing, in which case if the opponent has armor, then armor piercing can get through armor, or in some cases cover, depending on the cover, by rolling the special number. There's all sorts of different things. Each one is described. So ship combat works similarly, except that everyone has to take a particular station, whether it be on the bridge or elsewhere around the ship, and that station has access to certain actions. So, for instance, if you want to take an attack pattern alpha, which is an attack pattern action, at the helm, you actually have to be at the helm. So, or if you want to recharge the shields, you have to be at the engineering console. So on and so forth. If you want to fire torpedoes or phasers, you have to be at a weapons console. It also works with turns, and so normally with NPC ships, you don't want to actually have to create an entire crew and have them take actions individually unless it's a very important NPC ship. So, for instance, the crew has come across Lolani Tan's ship, the Infinite Opportunity, a few times. If they were to come across that another time and there was supposed to be ship combat, I would probably roll up a crew for her, just because she's been a recurring character now, and this would be like a third time that she's showing up, and so she should probably have a fleshed out crew. But normally that's not going to be the case, and so the assumption is that you just take as many turns for that ship as it has points in its scale value. And so if we open up the Lexington ship again, you'll see that there is where did the scale value go? I don't remember exactly. Oh, here it is, scale 4. So that's because it's a Constitution class ship. Each class of ship has its own scale value, and it determines a few things. It determines the ship's resistance. It determines its crew support. A few other things. And it basically is a measure of both how physically large the ship is, as well as how big of a crew it has. So, for instance, those two things usually go up and down mostly together, but you might have a large cargo hauler that is very big physically, but only has a crew of like 5 people. That would probably have a relatively low scale. Whereas if you had, say, a more compact ship like the Defiant, its scale might indicate that it should be like its size might indicate that maybe it's scale 2. But it might actually be a little bit bigger because it's actually a compact, powerful ship with lots of crew doing stuff. So that is scale. And then I think, so here's what I'm going to do. I want everyone to think up if you have questions about how we play the game based on what you've seen or just that you are curious about. Start thinking about those, because I'm going to quickly go over how we do a supporting character and the way, because that is one of the best mechanics that I think this game has, right? So basically, one of the things that you'll note if you played tabletop RPGs is sometimes there are bits where your character just doesn't have a whole lot to do, right? Like if you have a scene where you're researching in the library of the Wizards Academy to find out ancient lore about, the sword of Grabthar or something, right? That you need to defeat the demon lord who's invading. Okay, but you're playing the barbarian with like an intelligence of 8. What are you going to do in that scene? Probably nothing. You're probably just going to sit around. Well, in Star Trek, because you're on a ship full of people, there's usually some guy who's like, "Oh, he's our ancient archaeology of like Vulcanoid civilizations guy." And this is like, you have one of those? Yeah, it's the Enterprise. Of course we do. Oh, okay. Let's call him in. Okay, but he's never been seen before, and no one ever thought that we had like a expert on archaeology of ancient Vulcanoid civilizations. So what do? Well, we roll up a character, but we do it very quickly with an abbreviated set of rules. And we're not going to go through the normal character creation rules. That's something that if you want to play Star Trek Adventures, grab one of the core rule books. It has all those rules in there. This is just to help you understand what we're doing in play. So, a starting character, a supporting character starts out with I'm on the wrong page of my rule book here. Here we go. So you start out by assigning attributes. You get a 10, 2 9s, 2 8s, and a 7 to apply to any of these attributes here. Lieutenant Fitz actually is a supporting character, so you get that array. Then for disciplines, you get a 4, a 3, 2 2s, and 2 1s. You can see a 4, a 3, these 2 2s, and these 2 1s. Then you can choose up to 3 focuses. Actually, you have to choose exactly 3 focuses. Borg Emporium says, can we get a Borg drone as a supporting character? If it is appropriate to the scenario, then yes. Finally, you give them the standard equipment. Also, you're going to give them like a name, a species, that kind of stuff. What species they are does not normally matter for their attributes or disciplines. You can just assume that during whatever life they had, those are included in the attribute list that you get. You just get those flat numbers. And so you put in the trait for their species, give them a name and a rank. Usually it's not higher than lieutenant. And then importantly, doing this reduces your crew support, your current crew support, by 1. I'm just going to put this up to 5 because between missions it always goes back up. But you can only call in as many supporting characters as you have crew support for. And also other things like using a security team or a medical team or an engineering team. You want to beam down. That also costs crew support. And those are things that can give you advantages. So crew support is something of a limited resource. But in most missions, it doesn't go down to 0. So it's just like, you can't just pull out infinite supporting characters or engineering teams or whatever. But as long as you're doing so at a reasonable pace, most people aren't going to run out of crew support. So, I'm going to take a look at some questions. And once we're done with questions, I think that'll be it. We're just going to wrap up. This is not supposed to be a super long stream. So let's see what we got. Mark Right-Handed Sith Smith says, what are the minimum publications you need to play online, and where do we get them? So, the absolute minimum that you need is one of the core rulebooks. The core rulebooks, there are, I believe, 3 for first edition. There is the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game core rulebook, which is a Federation-focused. It assumes you're all playing Starfleet. There is the Rules Digest, which makes the same assumption, but it is much cut down. It does not have most of the fluff from like setting, background, and stuff like that. It's also a little bit better organized, if I'm being honest. The Star Trek Adventures core rulebook for first edition is notoriously badly organized. It's a kind of a pain in the ass to figure out where you need to go. There's also the Klingon Empire core rulebook. That is much better organized, but it also makes the assumption that you're all playing Klingon warriors on a Klingon ship.
Which is probably a very good assumption to make.
I mean, look, it's a lot of fun to play as Klingons. I'm not going to pretend, right?
It's
Go
like
out there.
it's like playing a whole game of like a whole campaign where you're just a bunch of dwarves and you're all bards and you're sailing.
Yeah. In fact, actually, one of the player, so every player gets a role on the ship, unless you're doing the lower decks variant of the game. But we're not going to cover that because that's not primarily what we're doing. One of the roles for a Klingon ship is the Wut-Wit, or the ship's cook, and one of the things you can do is once per session, you can declare a feast with the captain's permission. And so you have an extra scene where everyone sits around in the galley, feasting and drinking, singing songs and boasting of achievements, and it gives you bonuses in the next scene because you're all like well fed, liquored up, and encouraged by all the bravado and song singing. So basically, you just have like a Viking feast, and then everyone does better the next scene. Um, so
Before anybody panics about potentially needing so many books, they are not expensive as Dungeons and Dragons books.
that's true, and also it has everything you would need to both run a game and play a game, and also they're available as PDFs. And that's what you would need to play no matter what, right? So if you want to play on Roll20 like we're playing, Roll20 is free. You can get a subscription. I have a subscription for some additional features and additional storage space on their servers, which is one of the reasons why I have monetized this channel, is to help pay for things like that. So, hey, feel free to super chat if you want to help me offset the cost of running these games. So that is all you need. There are many additional things that come with additional species, additional ships that you can play as or fight against, that have additional lore, additional talents. So the core rulebook is all you need, but there's a whole lot more if you want to go more in depth. Let's see. Can we get a Borg drone as a supporting character? Was already asked. The answer is that's going to depend, right? Technically, there's nothing in the rules that stops you from playing a game as a bunch of Borg drones. I don't know if that would be a fun game to play, but it's a game you could play. Because technically, nothing in the game requires that you be Starfleet. For instance, like if you wanted to play a bunch of like Romulan officers, I guess, like it's still going to come down to like control, fitness, presence, daring, insight, reason, command, security, science, con, engineering, and medicine. If you want to play a bunch of Bajoran farmers, I guess you could do the same thing. But the rules do heavily focus on Starfleet. Now, I know that second edition has a less strong emphasis on everyone being in Starfleet and is much more open-ended as to what where you are, what government you might work for, if any. But because I have so many source books for the first edition, and because I've already planned out like a 2-campaign arc with a one-shot at the beginning, all with first edition, I'm not making the change until after we're done with the second campaign, if we decide to continue on doing more campaigns and Star Trek Adventures. So, let me see if there are any other questions. All right. Oh, RageBot just joined the channel at the ensign level. Welcome, RageBot. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'll send you some Star Trek Deltas. So
have some 12-year-old JFK Jr. cheers. Yay!
There you go. So all right, I am not seeing too many other questions. The DM says, "Why would you play anything other than a bard?" Good question. Unfortunately, there technically are no bards in this game. You might have noticed there are no character classes per se, and that is true. There are no character classes, and character advancement is 1, not very quick. 2, usually just swapping things around. So normally, if you get a character advancement, you could do something like maybe Dr. Tregan is going to lower her insight to 10 and instead increase daring to 10, right? That's the most typical thing. It's very uncommon that you can just add 1 to something, but it does happen occasionally. You can also usually spend your character advancement on the ship instead of your character, which actually Jordan, who plays Captain Hawk, did recently. He swapped out a talent on the ship to a talent that he thought would get more use, and it immediately did get more use, so it was a good call from him. Let's see. I am not seeing any other... Oh, Lieutenant Fitz of Rage has gifted membership, which went to Mark Right-Handed Sid Smith. Thank you very much. All right, well,
Yay.
I am not seeing any other questions.
I think that there's one thing we could add in.
Okay.
Nothing is stopping you from trying to build your ship in a way that it looks like the Millennium Falcon and is filled with characters from Star Wars.
Technically, that's true. You would have to base it on some ship frame, either that you made custom or that you just adapted. But yeah, I mean, technically, that's true.
I'm just
Um,
saying, you could play Luke Skywalker and
yeah,
Darth Vader in the Millennium Falcon in Star Trek.
if you wanted to, yeah. Oh, another thing is your species really does not have a huge effect on the character, which means if you want to play as a custom species, that is actually an option that's just in the core rulebook. Right? You pick 3 attributes that you get a +1 bonus to during character creation, and then you can get a species trait, and usually the species trait is just like that's what your species is, and then you can pick like some species talents from the talent list, or you can work with your GM to come up with a talent that is similar in power to another species talent, but that's maybe a little bit different. So, for instance, this the long view is a species talent for Dr. Tregan. Through their extremely long lives, Adosians come to understand and gain knowledge more extensively than most other individuals. When a character uses this talent, when a character with this talent uses a milestone to exchange a focus, they may do so twice instead of once. Maybe you could have one that instead applies to attributes rather than talents, or
Yeah,
focuses, right? Like you could work with your GM to do something like that, and
yeah. I
it's
mean, the
really
other
not
one is
hard.
like the Adosian 3-arm thing, right?
Mm.
That could easily be, like, tweaked around and adapted and changed up a little bit just to fit whatever you're trying to do a little bit more.
Maybe you have a prehensile tail, and you can take the exact same talent, except you change the flavor text. Talk
Yep,
about your tail.
or an extra robot arm.
Yeah, maybe you have an extra robot arm. So yeah, it's a very flexible system. And one of the things is that the system is designed to make everyone feel like they're generally a competent person, which is part of the Star Trek things, right? Everyone's just generally good at what they do in Star Trek, at least among the main characters, right? You don't
Yeah,
usually
it's also,
have
like, not a very heavy combat-focused game, but you
true.
can tweak that if you want to.
Yeah, you can
Once you
have a
get the
bunch.
hang of it, you can get through combat pretty quickly.
Yeah, it is actually a pretty fast combat system. There is one thing about combat I didn't mention. Generally, if you take 5 stress or more from a single attack, you suffer a wound, or if you're reduced to 0, or sorry, you fill up your stress track. There we go. You also take a wound. There are ways to avoid taking wounds. Um, Wounds generally put you out of action for the rest of the scene, and they may have consequences in following scenes. So, Zooey Tomato says, but Barkley exists. Barkley is actually extremely good at his job. He's extremely bad at dealing with other people. But when it comes to actually doing engineering, Barkley is amazing.
Hey, being competent at what you do does not mean you're good at everything, unless
Right.
you're Dr. Tregan.
Well, yes, of course. Dr. Tregan, who's good at everything except maybe engineering.
Hey, nobody's seen Tregan fail,
Okay, that's
and
true. That's true. But usually because we don't ever ask her to do engineering because we know better.
I mean, you know, that's not every group.
True. It is this group though. And that is actually
Yes.
what this is less of a rule thing, and it's more of just a the spirit of the game. I allow a metagame discussion about who's best for the task because I assume that as far as in-game knowledge goes, all the characters know each other's strengths and weaknesses well enough to know who's best at a particular job.
Yeah. I also think again, if you're playing for like long term, you're that's information you're gonna have anyway. So like, it's not difficult for you to know that your barbarian is a big chunk of hit points and can take a hit. Like, you know that your characters know that. It's not. It makes sense that the players know that Dr. Tregan, who is a doctor, knows how to do medicine.
Right. Yeah. So, for that reason, I allow a fair bit of metagame discussion about who's best for what task. But yeah, I think that basically covers it. Unless anyone has any last minute questions, I want to say thank you. I hope this helps clarify what's going on. I don't usually have the roles up and visible because there's a lot of other stuff on the screen that I want people to focus on, especially if it's just people's faces. I want people to be able to focus on the players and their interaction. Um, but yeah, so that's what it means when I say, oh, this has a complication range of 3. Now you know what that means. or if I say, "Oh, you've already done a task for this round of combat." Now you know why I say that, what that means. Let's see. Mark Right-Handed Sith Smith says, "What if I want to make Battlestar Galactica? How would one adjudicate one-man fighters like Vipers?" So that's actually pretty easy. There are already rules for single-person craft. They count as scale one craft, and basically there are rules for designing your own space frames. You would just do that with a scale one craft, and there you go. There are actually rules in Star Trek Adventures First Edition for some fighter craft, because later on, especially in Deep Space Nine, there actually were some single band fighter craft from both the Federation as well as the Dominion. Um, so yeah, there are in fact already rules set up for that. Um, so yeah, it just acts like any other starship. It's just small and has a crew of one, and basically it would mean that whatever station you're at contains essentially all the different stations that any other ship might have. Let's see. You said earlier that bards don't exist in Star Trek. I gave you Jadzia Dax, Commander Riker, and Tom Paris. Look, being a bard isn't just the same as playing music, right? You actually have to be able to produce all those magical effects if you want to be a bard.
I mean, technically, doesn't Picard play the pan flute
No,
or
it's
something?
basically a recorder. But yeah, he does
So
play the
who
flute.
plays flute? Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Like a character would be like a bard would be like a character who gives other characters pep talks before they go do a thing. So maybe Troy?
Or any of the CO characters, because
Yeah.
in the game, CO characters have options for giving pep talks that can do things like generate momentum or allow people to take tasks out of turn. So
Yeah, I think that would be the closest you're gonna get to a bard, and it'd be closer to like a 4th edition bard or a 3.5 bard than it would be a 5th edition bard.
yeah,
Because 5th edition bards don't do a whole lot for other people except for giving like specific spells or giving inspiration. Whereas like if Picard is giving a speech to rally his troops, that could be a bard ability, or it could be like a commander, like fighter ability. But those are 4th edition styled abilities, not 5th edition ones.
yeah. All right. Well, I think that is going to be us wrapping things up. I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your Christmas or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, whichever one you're celebrating, because they're all happening right now. Um, and stay safe out there. And I hope to see all of you tomorrow at
Hoo hoo
11
holidays.
a.m. Pacific on my main channel for more looks at Bodhi Hodge's book about the Tower of Babel. So, and Chesh, get some lozenges for Christ's sake.
I know, right? I was trying to get some Vicks Vapor Rub, but everything's closed right now.
Boo. All right. Well, bye, everybody.
Bye. See you guys on Debate Hub, I guess.